Let's try that again. Hello. Hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah, so welcome to the morning after the night before. The first one on the new computer, first one on the new channel, the replacement for F This Gay Earth. So, hi, hello lovelies. Please do subscribe to this channel as well as my regular one and everything else. It's been a bit of a nightmare to set up, to be honest. Firewall issues and things, and previously I was using Windows 7, so I'm still kind of grasping my way around Windows 10 a bit, even though I've had it on my laptop for a very long time. I'm also going to be rather distracted this morning because I'm running late. I've got a whole bunch of work and stuff I need to do in other windows. So hopefully everything will be all right. One can hope. Fingers crossed, anyway. Right, so let's see. Any housekeeping? Yes, right. So I'm suspended on Twitter for a few more hours, since it seemed to happen just before I went to bed. Why am I suspended on Twitter, you might well ask? After all, I am such a good boy, as as we all know. Um, I got into arguments with Brexiters over the weekend, and you know how they're always going on about how people are snowflakes and can't handle it when people talk to them and all that kind of thing. Well, that turns out to be projection, apparently. It's a similar issue to I've run into before, though, which makes me think that Twitter is farming out all of their enforcement and so on to India or something, somewhere that doesn't understand, doesn't get, doesn't grasp the idioms of other countries. Because one time before I got suspended for saying the phrase enough rope to hang yourself, as if that was a threat or something, right? Which it isn't. It's just an idiomatic phrase. And one of the tweets I was told I was suspended for this time was "eat crow." Right? How is that a threat? How is that anything? To eat crow is to eat your own words. To have to swallow the fact that you were wrong doesn't seem particularly hostile or anything to me. Say hi in the chat if you're around, just to make sure everything's working, please. So yeah, that's fun. I did say cunt in another one, but again, that's kind of British language, and I wasn't calling anyone specific a cunt. So who knows what the fuck? But I should be back on Twitter rampaging again in an hour or two, I think, given the time. So, what? Anything else? No, I'll get to it in the rest. Everything's Brexit. There's no point dividing it up at the moment. It's just hectic with the Bojo government in full swing. So let's just jump right into it, shall we? Hi, Internet. It's me, Corey. What's really interesting at the moment is all the arguments that Brexit is the democratic will of the people and we must uphold democracy and so on. All bullshit at this point. All absolute horseshit. 3/4 of the country, well, okay, 2/3 to 3/4, somewhere in between, right, are against a no-deal Brexit. They don't want a no-deal Brexit. That's a qualified majority of the country does not want a no-deal Brexit and all the hardship and bullshit that will come with it. So even the corrupted, illegal, purely advisory vote that we did have, not my opinion, High Court's opinion, even that, yeah, it's not a mandate for any kind of no-deal Brexit. But what we have now is an unelected PM who has never faced the ballot box as Prime Minister, leading a government that has never faced the ballot box, which is made up entirely of the hard right wing of the Tory party, who are trying to force through the worst version of something nobody voted for. It wasn't even ever really suggested. People ruled it out all the time. And he's doing it by avoiding Parliament, democratic accountability, and so on. And furthermore, an unelected advisor to Boris Johnson is the one really running the show, apparently. Because it's from him that a warning has come from the government to Tory MPs that if they rebel, right, if they go against the government, they will be deselected. Okay, what does that mean? That means in any forthcoming election, they will not get any support from the central Tory party, and they'll be deselected, so they won't be chosen to stand if they choose to stand in those areas. They will have to do so off their own back, perhaps with the support of the local party, but without any national support and with a national competitor for that seat. So it's as close as you can really get to threatening to fire people if they don't go along with you. It's profoundly undemocratic, again, and it's coming from an unelected advisor. So if you support Brexit because you believe in democracy, take a good, long, hard look at yourself, because none of this is democratic. There's some people talking about there's going to be a push for another election. In normal circumstances, I think that would be a good idea, because then it would give whoever does end up in government, and it's likely to be another coalition one way or the other, would at least have some ballot box legitimacy. But then our electoral system is fucked as well, and not fit for purpose. First past the post doesn't work. So, and I don't think it's going to solve the calculus in Parliament. It's going to be a huge mess, because you're going to have the Tory party and the Brexit party at loggerheads, even though they might enter into some kind of agreement, but it's still going to cause issues. Then you've got whatever Conservative MPs get deselected, who are likely to still stand in their constituencies. So that's going to split the Tory vote between the rebels and new loyalists put in to take them over. And on the other side, you've got a rainbow alliance of everyone except Labour, because Labour still think they can win a general election, which they probably can't by themselves, but they're going to still run the election as though they can, while the Rainbow Alliance might give them free rein because they believe in the cause and seem to be serving the country. Jeremy Corbyn is still serving Jeremy Corbyn, unfortunately. So, yeah, it continues to be a rolling clusterfuck, but now it's also on fire. But if you support Brexit because of democracy, you don't, right? Or you'd be as outraged by what's going on as I am and the illegality as I am. You would be worried about the illegitimacy of the vote, like I am. All the arguments people gave for Brexit, they've all fallen away at this point, and I am pretty much out of understanding and tolerance. I've tried really hard to understand the other point of view. I've tried to listen. All I've gotten is abuse and a Twitter suspension for it. But what's left, other than I don't like foreigners? Well, nothing else holds true. Not a single jot. Not quite true. If you're a fisherman and you take an entirely parochial view of the world, then okay, you still have a slightly legitimate reason to support Brexit. Not particularly, given revelations around fishing and so on since, but still. Excuse me a moment. Right. Let's see, what's the next story? Nobody watching. I guess it's a new channel. I have to just hope people will turn up and watch the rerun. Plus, I'm running late, so people weren't expecting it. Next story. Yes. Okay. So, Brexit still might not happen. There is a path to preventing it. It still might happen. There is a path to forcing it through by default, unless the EU budges on the deadline, which they might, depending on other things. But what we're probably looking at is Parliament saying you have to extend and renegotiate, the EU probably going along with that, then moves to try and stop it. If not that, then maybe an election. But whatever the case, Boris Johnson's government, and God, that's an uncomfortable phrase in my mouth. Boris Johnson's government is blowing £100 million on a get ready for Brexit campaign. Now, you may recall that some of you were complaining that the government during the referendum did what it is perfectly entitled to do and gave its advice as a government separate to the campaign, and they spent £6 million on that. Perfectly legal and above board, right? Unlike Aaron Banks, is still unknown total amount of overspend and so on. Now they're blowing £100 million of public money on a get ready for Brexit campaign. So, where's the outrage? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? So yeah, this is to push onto us as private citizens and businesses protections and safeguards and so on that the government should have done, and they're blowing £100 million on it, which would surely better be spent, even though it's a drop in the bucket, to preparations, softening the blow, public social investment, something like that. There's no reason they can't have basically party broadcasts or say, for the good of the nation, we need to do this, and put out something without it costing the earth, right? It just needs to be an infomercial. Someone could run that off in a couple of hours on Windows Movie Maker or something. This seems pointless. There is no way to leave at this point in an orderly manner. We're all fucked regardless. This just seems like sparkly sprinkles, hundreds and thousands on a big turd. Huge waste of money. If you're outraged at 6 million, you should be outraged at that. Plus, it still might not happen. Let's leave Brexit behind for a moment and tackle something a bit more cheery. The police are dealing with more mental health incidents, apparently. And this has been going on for the last 4 years or so. What has happened in the last 4 years? But yeah, so the police are dealing with a greatly increased number of mental health incidents. It's a rise of nearly a third. Let me just check my notes here. 28%. A rise of 28% in mental health related incidents. People are under a lot of stress, poverty is an increasing issue. Food insecurity is an increasing issue. It's not really that surprising that things have increased so much, and it's increased year on year since 2014. The police aren't particularly trained for it. The few that are overstretched. It's gone from 385,000 mental health incidents in 2014 to 494 mental health incidents in 2018, and we don't have the full information for this year yet. That's from 36 out of 46 police forces around the UK, so that's not even all of it. Mental health provision is terrible, especially for men. The things that are available aren't particularly effective, particularly for men. There's a one-size-fits-all attitude to mental health in this country, and it's just not true. But providing proper, decent mental health care is expensive and ongoing. Add to that the fact that the DWP is always looking for any excuse to not pay people the support that they're owed. The stress that comes with that, the strain that comes with that, the shift onto universal credit, which should have been a good thing, but isn't, and has led to people's benefits being cut or suspended for periods. It's really not surprising that there are more mental health incidents. Anyone could have seen this coming. You know, a blind man with his head in a bag could have seen this coming. Yeah, I keep doing everything I can to try and forestall this, not just because it affects me directly, but you know, when I have a bit of spare cash, I give it to local mental health charities if I can. Make donations there. I try and do videos to provide support for people. But there's only so much you can do. There has to be a shift at the governmental level, and it's more efficient and effective to do something at the governmental level. There needs to be a wholesale change to the approach to mental health in this country. And it's not coming, particularly under this government. I mean, the latest thing is the police have been asked to provide lists of disabled people, whether mental or physical, who have gone on protests to the Department for Work and Pensions. And you just know that is a precursor to taking away their benefit. Or if you're well enough to go on a protest about your benefits being cut and the treatment that you're getting by independent assessment services and whatever, then clearly you're well enough to work. That is going to be the argument. You can see it. You can see it coming, and it's fucking disgraceful. It's like taking away pensioners' money if they go on protests or strikes or whatever. It's a total fucking disgrace is what it is. I don't know, man. I hate it all. Hate it all. Excuse me a minute. No, typing's louder now. It's going to be super annoying for you, isn't it? Right, what's the next depressing story to look at? Oh, local one. It's been a lovely stabbing in Basingstoke. One person dead, one seriously injured. Man died. The person is in hospital. Two men, aged 29, and a 36-year-old woman, all from Basingstoke, and a 16-year-old boy from Croydon, of all places, have been arrested. This didn't happen in Popley. Anyone who knows Basingstoke will have expected that this would have happened in Popley, but it actually happened, ironically enough, being a stabbing, at Shooters Way, near the Southview Junior School, which, if I remember, because I used to live in Basingstoke for a while, is near the Southview Junior School, and it's quite a nice area actually. So this is a little odd. Maybe it was a robbery. who knows? But police are saying that the two incidents are linked. So I don't know. Just this stuff comes close to home, which means it has more impact on you. But if you look at the overall rate of violent crime, well, anywhere in the West, but the UK and the US in particular, it really peaked in the 90s. It's much lower than it was in the 90s, and it's only upticked very slightly lately. So this idea that there is this sudden, massive, unprecedented explosion of violent crime in the UK, of knife crime in particular, it's just not true. Right? Anyone trying to blow up this story only shows the stats for the last couple of years. But again, if you look at everything since the 90s or the 80s, or as far back as you want to go, it's not quite the best we've ever had in terms of violence and knife violence, but it's close, and it's not far off at all. Let's see, more Brexit, unfortunately. Now, I had someone arguing earlier that Brexit would drive down house prices and it would be good and it would drive up wages. Well, yeah, to an extent. One of the areas in which it has driven up wages is in construction, because there's a lot less Polish, Romanian, and so on workers over here. Great if you're someone who builds stuff, or a plumber, or an electrician, or a brickie, or whatever. Not so good if you're trying to get on the ladder and buy a house. Now, existing houses, the price has dropped slightly. The market's gotten a bit more difficult for that. But that's not necessarily good for the majority of people either. Right? There are no good ways out of this, because a lot of people in the UK, house ownership is a huge thing in a way that it isn't necessarily on the continent or necessarily in the States. People don't like to rent; they like to own, even if it's a shit heap, right? And that is almost like banking money. Owning land, having a house, something you can pass on to your children or whatever. It's a huge thing over here in a way that it isn't for others. And renters have a different attitude here than they do in a lot of other countries. They're a lot more restrictive, a lot nastier. There's a lot more fly-by-night types or buy-to-let type people who just aren't interested in running the property, looking after it, or giving you any control over the property that you're renting. They just want to rake in the money and have nothing whatever to do with it. But existing houses, the prices have dropped by 6.2%. But wages in construction in the UK are going up. Great, again, if you're a builder, but that means the cost to produce houses is going to go up. It also means that there aren't really enough people in construction to go around, which is going to drive up problems again and constrict the housing supply. So for new builds, for council builds and so on, which have huge problems anyway, if you're someone young trying to get a house, that side of things isn't going to get any better for anyone. And given the pound continues to lose value, you might be being paid more pounds, but they're not worth as much. So this is going to cause problems, and construction, like anything else, relies a great deal on imports. So yeah, that's all screwed as well. Yet more Brexit. So one of the ways in which the deadline might be extended or Brexit might be stopped, one way in which Parliament might seek to avoid the proroguing of Parliament, which the government is engaged in to avoid scrutiny and try and force through an undemocratic no-deal Brexit. One of the ways Parliament's trying to stop that is by bringing in legislation, which would force, one would hope, the government to go back to the negotiating table or write off no deal entirely. That would be the next sort of sets of legislation and so on. Now, Parliament in the UK is sovereign. That means the buck stops with Parliament. Parliament makes the laws. Everything else is accountable to Parliament, except the Prime Minister during some kind of emergencies. And there are some powers that belong to the Crown, but that doesn't mean the Queen. That means the executive and the Prime Minister. But by and large, right, Parliament makes the law. Parliament can override anything else in our system, and it acts with the power of the sovereign in those instances. It's a bit more complicated than that, but we did have a civil war over this, and that's how it all settled down. So if Parliament makes a rule that the government is not allowed to prorogue Parliament in order to avoid scrutiny over the no deal Brexit, that should be that should be the be all and end all of it, right? They should make the law. That should be it. The government should be bound to follow the law. But Michael Gove, who is currently Chancellor, he's the Pob-looking motherfucker, for those who remember Pob. He's appeared on, I think it was Ma over the weekend, one of the politics shows on Sunday, I think, and he was asked point blank, if Parliament makes a ruling that you're not allowed to do this, will you abide by the law? You would think this would be a no-brainer. The government minister, particularly such a high one, would just say, of course we will follow the law. We follow the rule of law in this country. It's kind of a big deal, right? He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't commit that the government would follow the law. What the entire and actual fuck, right? So even if Parliament makes a law that they can't do what they want to do, he's just saying, well, we might just ignore it. As if things weren't bad enough. Because at that point, there is no accountability. Will what they do be obeyed by the civil service, by the country? If they break the law, will they be held accountable by the judiciary and the constabulary? Yeah, that's really dangerous territory. A friend of mine thinks they will just ignore whatever Parliament says. I think that would be a really, really major thing and potentially extremely dangerous. Because at that point, you're getting the security services, the police services, and so on involved because the government is breaking the law. Now, it probably wouldn't be anything immediate. There would probably be challenges to and fro in court, and the government probably wouldn't be saying this unless they felt that they had some way around it. But since May's government, the Tory governments haven't particularly had a good record when it comes to court challenges. They've lost a lot of them. The one in Scotland isn't actually over yet. The one in Northern Ireland, I don't think is over yet. They're waiting to hear more arguments, and then there's another legal argument lodged in the British courts against this proroguing to force through a no deal. So I guess we'll see how those go. But if Parliament specifically makes a particular law saying they can't do this, and they defy it, and they do it anyway, coup is slightly overblown language, I'll admit, even though I've been using it. But at that point, it isn't. Oof, oof, indeed. Excuse me a moment. I give up. I'll get to comments at the end. I'm glad someone's commenting because I know I'm not just talking to myself. What else have we got? Oh, tech news. There's a few things I want to talk about here, not all of them from the news sites. So, Jack Dorsey was hacked, and his account was spewing racist and horrible things for a while. That's old news at this point, but it's appearing in the papers and the news sites and so on this morning. So, I mean, there's not a lot new to say about it. I mean, I would hope It would give Twitter pause about the way in which they react to this sort of thing and the things that people say and how quickly they make judgments on people and so on. I hope it would cause them to increase their security, but it's not particularly likely, is it? So yeah, I just wanted to make note that this happened, and that anything that happens after that happens in that context. YouTube. Look, I know you get bored with all YouTubers wittering on about everything that happens on YouTube, me included. Yeah, it's not like I make a huge amount of money off YouTube or anything. It doesn't even pay enough for the amount of time that I put into it. You know, I do it for other reasons. But we've been having a lot of mixed messages lately. So excuse me. So Susan Wojcicki, or however you pronounce it, put out this blog post saying, "We value free speech and we believe creators should be free to post challenging content on YouTube and things that skate the edge and so on, while at the same time saying that there needs to be more censorship and you know, mixed messages there, Susan, just slightly. They did restore a number of far-right channels after appeals because they hadn't broken the rules. I'm not a fan of the far right, but I believe they should be allowed to speak. I don't think the rules of places like Twitter or YouTube or Facebook are particularly good because they're very vague, and genuinely horrendous people can skirt around by settling on the letter of the rules, while innocent people get caught up in enforcement otherwise. It's not a good situation, and as my problems with Twitter today have shown, there's a bit of an issue, I think, around the people enforcing the rules on Twitter, and idiomatic language and cultures of different countries and so on. Now, if you're going to enforce an American standard, whether it be YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, then you need to make sure you're employing people from within that culture and reasonably open-minded people from within that culture to act as your human check on what is acceptable or not, right? And if you're going to make allowances, on the other hand, if you're going to make allowances for cultures like Pakistan or India or whatever, religious sensibilities in the Middle East or modesty sensibilities somewhere else, right, then equally you should apply that leeway to every country and the culture of every country, and therefore you would need enforcement people within those countries who understand those cultures and can enforce selectively upon other people from those countries, right? This wibbly wobbly middle ground where they're not taking a particular stand on a set of cultural norms or not, it's fucked. But yeah, Infowars was back for I think 24 hours before it was taken down again. So who knows? Who knows? But I do believe in free expression. I don't believe any of these channels were actively calling to hurt anyone or harm anyone, so they should be allowed to have their point of view expressed. And people like me and others should be free to look at their content, say this is bullshit, point out that it's bullshit, and that's how we move on. If you're not depressed enough by Brexit, the outlook for the Great Barrier Reef is very poor. Basically, if we want to save that, we need to move now on some localized geoengineering to try and reduce the acidity and reduce the temperature in and around the Great Barrier Reef in order to allow the coral to regenerate and grow. So there's a whole bunch of things we could do. We could stop tourism there. I know it's a big money maker for Australia, but that would help slightly. There are ways you can process seawater to lower the acidity. And if you'd like parked acidity removing devices or whatever, buoys, buoys, whatever you want to call them, over parts of the reef to remove some of the acidity just from the local area, that would help a great deal. You know, there's all kinds of things that could be done, but they're expensive. And we don't do them. And there's no will or money to do them, and it's the same problem in the Amazon. Now, I have a couple of friends in Brazil, and they say this is a huge issue. It's a huge local issue for them. It's a huge local issue for Brazil. It is starting to work against Bolsonaro. They would rather preserve the rainforest than be richer, quite frankly. A lot of people have a real sense of stewardship towards the rainforest. I know it's not just in Brazil, but that's where I know people, right? And if this carries on, it might eventually become enough to remove Bolsonaro, which would only be a good thing. The other aspect to this is that a lot of, not enough, but a lot of money and assistance has been offered by other countries to Brazil to help deal with this crisis, and it is on fire. And no, this isn't usual, and it's a great opportunity to bring attention to what goes on there, right? But they've refused all this help, probably because they don't want people from outside seeing the extent to which it's all gone to shit. Right. Okay, so there were a couple of other tech things I wanted to talk about, which I didn't when I was talking about tech, so I'll circle back round to that now. I was going to do videos on it, but I think it's not really enough to do a full video. So, okay, what should I start with? Look, Cyberpunk 2077. I'm really looking forward to it. I have a lot invested in Cyberpunk, the RPG. I'm running a tabletop campaign next year, and watching them be kicked around a lot by both sides in the culture war has been upsetting, because I think by and large they're trying to do their own thing and do it right from their point of view. Thread the needle to an extent, but that just means they've got shit from both sides, and you can't please anyone. And I don't think you should try to. I don't think you necessarily have to explain yourself or your design decisions, though they have. So we had the fuss about the trans advert, right? Transgender stuff has been a part of the Cyberpunk milieu since forever. It's been part of the Cyberpunk RPG since they did that supplement for When Gravity Fails, if I'm remembering right. Transgenderism was a huge thing in that. So the idea that Cyberpunk is transphobic somehow, or that this game is transphobic for including a trans model, or showing the crass commercialization of trans bodies or anyone else's body for that matter, that's just insane. A key theme of Cyberpunk is how changes to the body, what does that do to your humanity, what does that do to who you are. It's not a judgment on transgenderism, it's talking about, you know, turning yourself into a walking tank or whatever. And in Cyberpunk Red, they even addressed this in a passage, that preview for the new edition of Cyberpunk, where they say, okay, you don't lose humanity. Say you get caught in a blast by an IED, right? And your arm gets torn off, and you replace it with a cyber arm. That doesn't cost you humanity, right? And in the same way, if your character is transgender, identify themselves as being the opposite gender, and they undergo surgery, which would be more extensive, more convincing, and so on in a cyberpunk universe, if they undergo that transition, they're not going to lose humanity for it. Now, I think we could probably update those kind of humanity rules and so on to be more broad, inclusive, and open, and offer other things other than going psychopathic or whatever. I don't see the validity of this criticism at all. Then the usual thing, character selection screen, you can play male or female. They got blasted by the woke squad for that, right? So they removed the gender specification, and they just presented you with a male-seeming body and a female-seeming body, both of which can be customized to some extent on the character screen, but they didn't identify them as male or female. And they got blasted from the other side. I don't remember anyone being quite so much of a dick about this when it came to Saints Row. I think some trans people complained that you had the capability to make a woman with a deep masculine voice or whatever they regard it, but yeah, the option was there to make whatever you wanted, so it was the onus was on the player, right, to do one thing or the other. There wasn't anything to do with the programmers. They just gave you the option to do anything, and some people used it in a way that some other people regarded as disrespectful or whatever. But so you've got your outrage merchants on the left, but you also have your outrage merchants on the right. And yeah, I sympathise with Jeremy Hambley in a lot of ways. His treatment from the Magic community, the good things he's done in rooting out child predators who had ensconced themselves in the system. The fact that he was attacked, he didn't deserve that. But making a fuss over this is just utterly pathetic and obviously a click grab. Leave them the fuck alone. Let them do what they want. You don't have to agree with what they do, but this endless churning tide of outrage and bullshit one way or the other can just fuck off, quite frankly. It's just nonsensical. And the other big thing, okay, this impacts me directly, and I find it triggering, for want of a better word, in a lot of ways. So Alec Loker, I think that's how I pronounce his name, is like a music composer and various things in the indie scene. He was amongst a handful of people accused by various women in the indie game scene of being abusive or sexually aggressive or whatever else. And over this weekend, at some point, it seems he committed suicide because of these accusations. His sister posted something about it, saying that he had a history of mental illness, he'd been abused himself, he'd been working on it lately, and that basically this just knocked him right back. You know, he'd been trying to be a better person, and none of that mattered, none of that counted. And that seems to be what tipped him over the edge. This came at a bad time for me. I don't want to make it about me, but I'm on the cusp of another depressive dive. I can feel it when you've been ill long enough. You can kind of feel it in the wind. A good friend of mine is currently in hospital, mental hospital, because he's suicidal. I'm worried sick about him. And obviously, I've been targeted by the woke mob, not for anything so serious as this, but I do know what it's like, and I do know what it's like not to be believed by people who are your friends. I do know what it's like to be dropped and cancelled on the basis of hearsay and a say-so. So I understand the position he was in. These accusations haven't been substantiated, so far as I know, against any of these people. They haven't been tested by a court of law, but that doesn't matter. Yeah, you get an accusation and that is it. You are cancelled. And whether you've been a bad boy or not, I don't think you deserve to die. And I don't think you deserve to be cancelled until and unless there's some kind of proof that you did something. I don't believe victims, sorry. I believe evidence. And you have to establish that they're a victim first. calling Quinn a survivor when he didn't survive this. When, by all accounts, he had mental health issues that may have led to aberrant behaviour in the past, but that he'd been working on. And then that was all just pulled out from under him. His career, all the progress he'd supposedly made, according to his sister, all of that doesn't matter. It's a nuanced and complicated issue, especially since it also revolves around mental health. Yeah, and the courts recognise the idea of diminished responsibility, that if you're out of your right mind, you don't carry as much responsibility for what you do. I don't think it's an excuse exactly, but I think it helps us understand, right? I don't think Quinn set out to kill anybody. I don't know whether the accusations were true or not, but we have to stop treating them as if they're true, or there will continue to be casualties like this. People will continue to die at their own hand, whether they've done anything or not. And you have to ask yourself, are you willing to sacrifice even one person's life in order to catch or cancel however many genuine predators or problematic people there really are? But a man is dead. And the rump of what was left of Gamergate, the people that managed to monetize it, the outrage merchants, as I was just talking about, people like the Ralph retort, right? They are crowing at this. It's a hashtag, Zoe Quinn body count or whatever. That is disgusting and reprehensible, and I repudiate it utterly. It's just flat out wrong. This is nothing to celebrate. I mean, we've been warning about it for ages, but our approach to that should not be, ha ha ha, 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 I was right, you killed somebody, la la la. It should be a sober, careful, measured, tasteful pointing out that we were right, that this is an issue, that someone has now died because of false accusations within our area. I mean, plenty of people have died. Sorry, not false accusations, unproven accusations. But given Quinn's track record, I don't believe her particularly. There's a pattern of behaviour there, but still. Okay. Unproven accusations. We should not act like this on them until there's some kind of proof, some kind of backing, until it has stood some sort of test. And if someone abuses you, report them to the authorities, report them to the police, do something about it. Don't sit on it for years and then trot it out when it's convenient for you, right? And then on the other side, right, people are making all kinds of excuses for what she did, saying, oh, you can't blame the victim, it's not her fault this guy killed himself. Well, in a way, it is. Another way, it isn't. But it certainly didn't help, did it? And your cancel culture, your call-out culture, your culture of believe the victim rather than believe evidence, that contributes. And a man is dead. A man who, by all accounts, was striving to better himself, to be better about everything. What if Quinn kills herself as a result of the backlash, as a result of this happening? Who wins then? Nobody wins. Nobody has won anyway. We all lose when these kind of accusations and things go around. And I don't want anybody to die. I don't want to die, right? Except when I'm in the depths of depression. Then I kind of do. But yeah, this should be a splash of cold water, and we should all take a step back, admit faults on all sides, and sort it out. And this should be an opportunity to talk across the lines. But it isn't going to be. Since 2014, I have constantly and consistently been trying to reach across the lines, to talk to people, to find anyone from the other side of the culture war. Not that I'm particularly on anybody's side, but who would just talk to me. There's plenty of right-wing nutbars who will talk to me and spam my comment sections calling me a Jew as if that's a bad thing in the first place, or whatever. Yeah, the far right and the right and the conservatives and the reactionaries and the libertarians, we're moving more towards the centre now. They're all happy to talk. Anyone on the left, not willing or not able, right? And it's not that surprising when the guilt by association is so strong there. But surely we can step back, take a moment now, and say this has gone far enough, right? And restore communication and come to some manner of compromise. But probably not. Let's see if there's any comments or anything. Because I always leave those to the end. I probably didn't mention that at the start this time, but I do. Okay. Morning, Ben. I think you're my only viewer this morning. New channel. Seems to have confused everybody. What do I think of Labour's right to force a buyer from a private landlord proposal? I haven't paid that much attention to a lot of Labour proposals because I don't think they have a hope in hell of ever enforcing them, at least in the current political paradigm. I was against and remain against the right to buy from the council. So against the right to die from against the right to buy. Sorry, I was reading something about assisted suicide earlier. No, I was against right to buy from councils because that massively decreased the housing supply and increased homelessness and caused all kinds of problems that we're still dealing with today. Right to buy from a private landlord, I think I'd be against for the same reasons. But I think that if a property lies fallow, if it is not rented, sold, or occupied for a certain period of time, then there should be like maybe a governmental right to eminent domain to buy that back at less than market value and turn it into social housing. That would be the way that I would tackle it, because a lot of people are just buying up tranches of property, especially a problem in London, just as an investment, and they don't use it, right? They just leave it empty. And that increases the pressure on the housing market to no good end, right? I mean, it helps them because they're buying it, and then the fact that they're not using it for anything drives up house prices, including those house prices. Then eventually they sell it. But we don't have a housing shortage in this country. We have a lot of unoccupied housing. So that would be my way to deal with it. Ben also says that Channel 5 Nightmare Tenants Rubbish Landlords show makes me pity both sides. There are a lot of dodgy people on both sides, and there's a lot of renters who are like drug addicts and so on who can clean up nice for an interview and then things go wrong. It's a clunky new keyboard, not a clunky old keyboard. I made sure I bought a fairly high-end gaming keyboard with nice clunky keys because as a writer I thrash my keyboard. Ben also says, because he's the only one watching, banned Jack now. Hopefully he's got a few alts on there. Well, let's hope so. Whoever hacked him, is it Chuckling Squad? Something like that. Ben says they missed a great opportunity. Instead of the racist nonsense, they could have posted something believable. Yeah, or some actually positive policy changes or something. Things that could have been incredibly popular. Something like Ben suggests, I hate what this company has become. I can't control the moderators banning people subjectively. Free speech is truly dead. Would have been much better. It would have. It would. Buoys, 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 boys, boys, boys. Summertime love. Okay. You agree with me on the Zoe Quinn thing. What would those hashtag ghouls do if she ends up taking her life? Well, yeah, you're reading my mind because I did talk about her. And it should be a wake-up call to everyone. Indeed, it should. Right, well, hopefully, now that I actually have a video and that up on this channel, it will drive people to subscribe more and watch more. And hopefully I'll have my Twitter account back so that I can encourage people to watch. And now that I have everything sorted, I shouldn't have such a delay and a problem doing the stream next Monday. So I will see you then. Ciao and Zang.